All right, so I'm going to begin recording. Welcome everyone who's joining us live. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us. Just to kind of break down what's going on and the ground rules of what we're doing, not necessarily rules, but sort of expectations. You guys are going to stay unmuted. If you have a question, go ahead and shoot it through to the chat. I'll bring it up either at the end or in the middle. That way we don't have a bunch of interference into our headphones and that sort of thing, because if multiple people are talking at once, it'll never work. So everyone, thank you for joining me on a very special interview with Jason Nelson with Envy Reptiles. You can see he's there at the shop right now. Some of you may be aware, Jason was with us on our second panel forum on all things Pituophis, that's Gopher Snakes, Bullsnakes. This time we've chosen not to have an entire panel and instead just have Jason on. Personally, the reason I do this, I find that when we ask questions on platforms like YouTube or Facebook, the number of responses we get can be just absolutely overwhelming. So sometimes you'll get various responses on how to do something properly, and sometimes you'll get wildly inaccurate information. And if you don't know who you're speaking with, it's hard to differentiate the two. So what I like to do is just go to one person, one source. That's what we've got. I'm a big advocate of getting advice from one person at a time. So here we are. Welcome, Jason. How are you?
Good. How are you guys?
I'm good, thank you. So we've got a few folks joining us. This was one of the more popular events that we've had. So I'm glad that we have a few folks joining in. And as always, if you miss it live, you can catch it on YouTube later. So let's jump in. Envy Reptiles is a fairly big size operation. You've been featured on several highly watched YouTube channels. You've produced thousands of reptiles at this point, and previous guests of this channel have referred to you as the godfather of Pituophis. But you probably won't sell a snake to everyone who buys one this season. So aside from messaging you at Envy Reptiles, how would you advise someone to find a good breeder, someone who's looking for Pituophis?
I kind of like, there's a lot of good breeders out there. If you follow Pituophis enthusiast or bullsnake, some of the bullsnake pages on Facebook, or there's a lot of, you'll quickly learn who's been doing it for a while. And a lot of people, Glenn Brooks, Jennifer Joseph, Summer Stevenson's, that's just off the top of my head, but there's many of good breeders out there. And like, I kind of like to stay close to them all. And like, we all chat and we're all pretty friendly. So that's up where I would recommend to look. You'll see some of these guys posting pictures and information, and there's some really good guys out there and gals.
What about on Morph Market? Is there much of a gopher snake market and bull snake market online at Morph Market? As long as I've been doing this, I've just barely got onto Morph Market a month ago or two. So like, I'm pretty new to it. The response has been really positive and well. So yeah, I think that's a good spot too. So it's growing, right? It seems to be growing into a lot of species. So that's pretty neat that it would that it's incorporating those colubrids too. You were talking about meeting with the or staying in touch with the other breeders and things like that and keeping a friendly relationship. And I know there's in some circles some banding about the term hobby being used. Everyone says, oh, in this hobby, and we're all hobbyists. But the way you describe being in touch with the other breeders, it's really more of a community to me, I think, like a reptile community, amongst breeders. So I'm glad you touched on that, because I just wanted to add those 2 cents in. What questions should you ask a breeder before buying a new snake?
I always like, the most important thing is to me is if it's captive born or not. I'm an advocate of captive breeding. I don't per se like people taking animals out of the wild. I mean, it happens, but you just get a quality pet when you're getting a captive born animal. You're getting a better color, better temperament, healthier in every way. I like to buy snakes from people that know the background on their snake. They produced it themselves. It wasn't a third party type of thing. And that's one of the first things I go ask about and look for. and general questions, just how temperament and feeding, how well they're feeding, and the general questions like that.
When you're selling a hatchling snake, how many meals do you try and get in it before it's sold? Like, if I'm buying it and someone says, "Oh yeah, he just ate his first pinky, it's ready to go to you," is that for Pituophis? Is that good enough? I know in like I keep some rainbow boas back there, and most people kind of get 6 meals in them.
Pits are certain species are tougher than others, or more picky, like Great Basin gophers. They're a little more sensitive, but most of them just feed. That's why they're such fun animals, is because they just want to eat. And I think 2 meals is plenty, and then they're ready to go out the door.
Okay, so they're pretty good at self-starting then, huh?
Yeah, most of them. Like you always get a problem feeder here and there, but not nearly as much as kings and milk snakes and that nature.
One of our viewers, John Woodbury, asked if you know of any Canadian breeders.
I don't, actually.
Yeah, I would say probably, John, the best thing to do is, like Jason was saying, like join those groups and look around, the Pituophis enthusiast and the bull snakes, and talk to people and see who's selling in Canada, because there's got to be some.
I know there is. I just I can't remember the site. They even have I think there is a Canadian. I believe there's a Canadian pit page too. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's about networking, and most of the folks that are in this event, I'm sure they saw it on Facebook anyway. So it's join the Facebook groups in your region and try and see if get to talk to those breeders yourself. For the next series of questions, let's say I'm not only a first-time gopher snake buyer, but this will be my first snake in general. So tell me, should I buy a baby or an adult? I've heard things, like a hatchling snake is going to be more defensive and easier to kill. So what are the pros and cons versus babies versus adults?
In my opinion, I like a baby is easier to manage. They're small enough to handle. Yes, they tend to be more defensive. And I can show you some ways to break them of that or help beginners with pits, because I know they can be intimidating. Mostly the babies, like it's fun to watch them grow. They're a lot of more details generally about them. But as buying an adult too, they're usually strong, consistent feeders. So that's one benefit. And you mentioned, they tend to be less defensive. But at the same time, they could be a little more intimidating too. So. Yeah.
That was when I first got into snakes. If I could share a personal story, it was just a tiny little baby king snake, and she fit like one loop around my wrist. And so when I scared her and she struck at me, it was really easy to get used to that very, very first snake bite, knowing that it was, like a teeny tiny thing as opposed to a 5-foot snake. How big do the adults end up getting?
It really depends on size, species. I mean, bull snakes are probably there's some pine snakes that get fairly decent too, but bull snakes get bulkier. Most of mine are, 5 to 6 feet. I do have some 6.5, pushing 7-footers. But and
which ones?
There is smaller species of gopher snakes, like a Great Basin gopher. They're very similar to a corn snake size. So, there's a pretty good range depending on species.
I wonder, do customers ever ask you for snakes that are going to get big, or do they ask for snakes that are going to stay smaller more often?
I get the bigger,
Uh-huh.
the bigger. Yeah, I get that, and I even get weird questions sometimes. I think they're weird. Like, I want an aggressive snake. I've had that.
Really?
Yeah, I want one that's pissed off all the time. All right.
Okay, I've got
can
that.
find one. I usually can find one. But
Yeah, that's funny. Do you have any babies there? Because I wanted to see if you could show a baby, if you have one available. If not, I understand. I know it's January. And then after that, I wanted to see how I could set up its enclosure.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Okay. So, and folks, for those of you who are just joining us, feel free to shoot a message in the chat. I'll ask the question as it comes up or at the end too. But otherwise your audio is muted. Okay, what do we have here?
So this is a ghost bull.
He's really flighty.
She's docile, but yeah, they'll get going on you. And so they're a little bit smaller than this. And gopher snakes are even smaller than this as hatchlings. Bull snakes tend to be bigger. Pine snakes are bigger as well.
Okay. Yeah, if you get closer and up just a little bit higher. And a little closer to your body too. That's a really pretty snake. What goes into the ghost morph?
This one is an xanthic and hypo. And it's the Miami County xanthic and the Stillwater hypo in this one particular here.
And are those both recessive traits?
Yeah, most colubrids are recessive.
Okay, so that's got double recessive traits, and it makes it the ghost. Yeah. That's really cool. I think that these Pituophis, some of the morphs in these snakes are some of the most undervalued and kind of underrepresented snakes in the hobby, because just those patterns on it is really clean, and it's like the whites are really pop against the darker contrast. I love that snake. That's a hatchling. I think that's about like the size that they'd be shipping out, right? For a bull snake.
Yeah, it's probably 16-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Foot and a half. Yeah. We'll get one with a little more spunk here.
Okay, so we've got what is this one? He's looks like he's ready to strike.
This has got the red gene in it.
Okay.
And hypo Stillwater is.
And so that's another bull snake.
Yep.
And then some kind of colloquialisms, they would call them puff snakes or blow snakes. And I think you could kind of hear some of that hissing before he's striking. So when you get a snake like this, what's the best way to handle them when they're clearly not in a good mood?
When they're defensive like this, and I'll put it in this tub, and this is what I recommend, because they're going to be, watch, see, he's just going to come after me. And if you're sitting here going like this, they're going to think that their defense is working. What I recommend is just go right after him and pick him up. Don't let him get in that defensive position. Get him in a escape mode, because after he knows that his bluff's not working, this snake is going to want to escape, and so then it quits biting. See how it's calmed down? Yeah,
you could see once he's been picked up, he settles down a lot.
Yeah, and I just don't let him get it. If I'm going to handle him and they're sitting there striking like that, I won't let them get in that defensive. I just go right in. If they bite me, they bite me. Their teeth are so small. Like bit right there, and you can't even, well,
Right, and that
I
there's
mean,
the
it's barely anything. I can't even feel it. So, yeah.
yeah. And Martin asked if that's the flame morph, and no, that's just you said it's a red Stillwater hypo, right?
Some people call it the flame, but this one in particular has this purple coloring.
Mm-hmm.
And so the flames tend to be orange on orange or red and orange.
Okay. Another viewer, Madison's asking, the hatchlings seem large enough to skip right to fuzzies. She says pinky seem too small. Is that right?
Yeah, for bull snakes, yes.
Okay. So there you go. So you don't have to start right at pinkies. What would you house that in as a baby? How would you set up the enclosure?
This is my size of tub that I'll keep my my keepers in. So if I was this snake, I did keep it last year. I hatched it and last summer. And so I'll put it in about this size tub or a 16 or so. But I'll do, a lot of times I like to do paper towels first, and then I might switch over to aspen.
What benefits do the paper towels have?
You can, because when they soil in here, you can just you can clean right up. If you use aspen, you can just spot clean, pick out, the bad areas. I like to offer hides, so I use paper towel rolls, and I end up with these. If they soil in these, then you just toss them out. No big deal. I usually do something as simple. I will even do this. I wanted to show you this because a lot of people don't do this. I get some green moss, and I'll crunch it up in here. And you can use a bigger tub than this, but this is really good for all colubrids. And I'll just get this damp. Probably a little too much, and this is great for the Western climates because you get dry, and then this will help. They love hiding in these. Mm-hmm. So I just use a deli cup to get an access, or I'll use this size for a bigger snake.
Okay.
And this will just go in here.
And so that's just a little deli dish with a hole in it, right?
Yeah. You can use something bigger, but I'll tell you what, they love going in there. That's a simple setup right here.
Yeah, so it's just a tube, a human hide, and then another deli dish that they could use for water, right?
Yeah, and why I like the moss, helps shed, they feel comfortable, they feel safe. When an animal feels safe, they're gonna feed better. These hides, they make them feel more comfortable. And this is a real basic setup. You could use aspen instead of paper towels or newspaper. The aspen is quicker for spot cleaning. And sometimes a lot of snakes like to burrow under that aspen. So that's a hiding place as well.
Okay, nice. And I've noticed this before when you've been featured on other channels that your hides are all pretty free.
Like cereal box, and it's great because it's sanitary, but they soil in it, and you just throw it away, and you're done.
And then use another sandwich box or empty Triscuit box, or
I just save stuff from at home all the time, and I use them.
Yeah,
it's not really visually appealing. You can do a natural setup too, and I'm not opposed to natural setup. But for me, where I run a bigger scale, I'm going to have something more simple like this, and simple hides that you can just throw away if they soil in it.
Yeah, that seems super convenient and effective. Scalebox LLC, good to see you, Dustin. He says that he rotates in chicken hearts for his bulls at least once a month, and they do really well on them and their diet, along with baby chicks, if you guys get on the diet discussion. So just to change things up, do you ever change up the diet? Do you know like what sort of things they're eating in the wild?
I do like to switch it up as much as possible. It's kind of hard. Just put it in there. I think it's a great idea to switch it up because chickens and mice eat different things. I mean, I just think more diverse diet, the healthier an animal will be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's going to change their gut flora, and just by the different kind of proteins that they're getting. And like you said, chickens eat different things than rodents do too. So you're not only getting the benefit of your food, but of their food, but of their food's food.
One thing I wanted to mention too is like, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but like I just want it's good for beginners to know. Your snake is only as good as what you feed it. If you're you're buying mice and someone's feeding them a poor diet like dog food or something like that, your snake's not going to be healthy in turn. So, your animals is only healthy as what you're feeding them. And so I am a proponent to really quality feed.
Absolutely. I think there needs to be more discussion on that, honestly, because it's easy to get everyone. I see people online in the forums and ask, who's the cheapest rodent supplier and that sort of thing. And I've seen people try and do it themselves, and the rodents are not kept in good conditions because it's overwhelming. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to raise mice or rats. It's a lot of work. Yeah. I'm happy to let other people do it for me. But yeah, absolutely. You are what you eat. And especially for an animal that's maybe eating one meal every 1 to 3 weeks, depending on what kind of animal it is, each meal is super important. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. How do you heat that little tug? It's just like a little shoebox size enclosure. So how do you heat that?
This rack over here that I just put it in, it has heat cable that runs in the back of it, and it's built for it. They're kind of tight, but like you can see some, I don't know if you can see back in there, but there's some cables back in there that they just run. They're built for it.
Okay. What about though, if I'm not putting in my baby in a shoebox size enclosure, maybe I don't have a rack, it's my only snake, would something like a 10-gallon reptile enclosure work?
Yes, 10-gallon aquariums work great. I use them. I still have a few actually. I used them for years.
How would you go about heating something like that for a baby?
They have heat pads that you can put underneath. I haven't done it for a while. I don't know, like it's been a little while since, but back in the day when I did it, I even built a rack out of an aquarium I had. It was about this big, and I just had, my drawers were tall. There was a lot of wasted space here, but I just had aquariums that would slide in and out like this even, and I ran heat tape behind them. But you can buy an individual heat pad. I know most pet stores and pet suppliers have that stuff.
Yeah, and just plug a thermostat between the mat and the glass. And what do you set it at? What temps do you keep your snakes on?
So like for me, like my optimum room temperature, if I can keep an ambient temperature, I like 78 is like my perfect temperature. I'll let that bounce from 75 to 82. With a hot spot of like 87, 86, maybe up to 90. And they'll self-regulate. They'll figure it out. They'll find where they feel comfortable at, and that's where they'll park down and rest, digest.
Yeah. And back to food, Heather asked, besides rodents, what else would you consider good feed?
Well, you mentioned chicks, baby chicks and stuff like that. I think like any like quail or anything like that would be great too. There's just not a lot of or at least what I'm doing when I'm working, the size of animals I work with, it's pretty much rats, mice, and chicks. I have some snakes I get going on lizards, nopes and kings usually sometimes, but I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, lizards can be tricky to source, especially if you're brand into it. Dustin was saying that he tends to find that bulls get a little rowdy above 75 degrees. Do you notice a difference in that in sort of their behavior? He likes to keep them around 70 to 72, he said.
That's
but
fine too. Like,
your input.
you can keep them, if you have a hot spot, you can keep them down to 70 easily. I don't have heat tape on all my animals. That's why I keep my room warmer. I find when they get over 80, they kind of get a little, that's when I see more agitation out of them. They're more of a firecracker. But yeah, they do not like it hot. Like a lot of people think desert animals, and no, they just 75, 80 degrees is probably where they feel comfortable at.
Yeah, I out here in California, I found them not on the 95 and 100 degree days. I don't see them out until like the evenings, once it starts to cool off and it's in the low 80s at the hottest. So that makes a lot of sense. You know, they're able to hide during the day. Staying on the range of food, on the topic of food, Kelly asked, she says, my bull is a 1.5 years old, pushing 5 feet and almost 3 pounds. Currently, he's eating once a week. What size, Kelly, is he eating once a week? When should he be switched to a longer feeding schedule, Jason?
What is she feeding it now?
So let's see. She says a small to a medium wrap once a week.
That's about standard. Like, I like that right there. I personally, with this collection size I have, it's okay to miss meals every now and then. Like, not every snake eats every week here. Like, and I just I do a visual check on them. Like, if they look a little lean, I'll throw a little more, feed them a little more consistently. If they're looking really thick and really, really good, I just kind of maintain that. Like, 2 weeks for an adult bull snake is not, it's, I would say 10 to 14 days is a pretty good schedule, really. As they're growing, once a week is pretty appropriate. But when they get bigger, my males will go off. They probably only feed like 4 months out of the year, my adult males. So
and that's because they're roommating during the winter, and then there's a period during the summer when they're just out cruising looking for females they don't want to eat, right?
Right. Yeah, most of them will do that. Like, and I hibernate 4 months. I find that I get better fertility that way. But 3 months is pretty standard. You got 4 to 5 months of hibernation and pre-hibernation with no food, and then they go off food for probably a month or 2. So like, they don't, and they look great. They come out of hibernation, they look tip top. So
what do you do for your hibernation? How do you put them? How do you cool them?
I have a room just on the side of this wall here, and I just cool that room down, and I get it to. I try to keep it in between 50 and 55.
Okay, so you drop it down low. I only have 2 snakes that I put into brumation, so I can use just a little wine cooler, because a regular fridge, the lowest temp is like, or the highest temp is like 45. So I didn't want something that cold.
And you can go higher temps than that. You can cool them in the low 60s. It's totally fine.
Okay, so have you done that and still had them reproduce for you?
I have. The fertility rate wasn't as great, but they still laid eggs. They still did fine.
Okay, cool. Someone related. This is related to food in the fun way. They said, I know they have fast metabolisms. How often per week can you expect to scoop poop for a single animal? And is there a difference in cleanup between bulls and other gophers besides volume?
They're very, like most of my clubrids, I care for the exact same. My corns, my kings, my mills, my bulls, my gophers, almost all of them I care for the same way. Yes, bull snakes have a larger volume. I try to go through my cages at least twice a week, usually day 4 after feeding, and then actually I actually will spot clean a lot of the times 3 times a week. I'll feed, I'll wait at 12 to 24 hours, then go through the cages. They're usually clean, but then there's uneaten items, so I'll do a spot clean when I do that, and then 4 days after I'll spot clean. And then and last week I did that too, and I did a 4-dayer, and then I came back in day 6, and there was plenty to clean up again. So 2 to 3 times a week, I think it's good. And if you have a smaller collection, more often is great, I think.
Okay. It probably can't stay in a 10-gallon enclosure its whole life. I think that's a pretty tiny little home for a snake that can get as big as 6 feet. What would you say is common for housing them for adults? What's a good way to set that up?
For my gopher snakes and some of my bull snakes, I love this 70-quart tub. This is perfect for a gopher snake. Like let's see what we have in here. Here's a 2-year-old bull snake. She's got plenty of room in here.
Mm-hmm.
She's longer than it, but. And then I also use some boa cages that are for my biggest bull snakes. I'll use they're 4x4, 4 foot by 4 foot. And then this size tub, it's an 80-quart, I believe. It's pretty good.
Yeah, let's move it over and see that one. Yeah. So okay, a little bit wider there.
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. This rack's old, but.
And so these are largely terrestrial snakes, right?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of head height in them, but you can. It wouldn't hurt. I would actually, if you're just keeping a couple of snakes, I think it's awesome to have height and some branches, and they'll go explore.
Go the bigger the better. But even in nature, that's the reason they call them gopher snakes, is because they find them in gopher holes. So it's that seems to be more their niche. And I noticed that the paper towel rolls and cardboard tubes seem to be really a fan favorite amongst Pituophis whenever I see them.
Yeah, and I will, I'll smash these paper towel rolls, and so they can, so it flatten, and then they squeeze in there. So then they could squeeze in this gap, because that's what they like. They like little cracks and crevices and tight boards on the ground, and yeah. So I smash those rolls sometimes when they're really small. If they're bigger, like a bull snake, I usually don't. But
yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. How often should I handle it?
I would, a couple times a week. That I would think. I wish I could handle mine more. I get a lot of feeding response. I think a couple times they get used to it. They know, and I'll just mention this too. And a lot of people probably know this, but when if I was going to feed a snake, and you can use a feeding tub. If this didn't have a hole in it, you could take the snake out of the drawer, put it in here with the rodent. Because when you open these drawers, a lot of times these snakes will come flying out and want to eat. Because every time, when I only open my drawers so much, so they every time this is getting open, they think it's feeding time. But if you put them in this and then put the food in there, you don't get that that aggressive feed response as much. They're a lot more docile, and then they know they just don't come out with their mouths flaring, so they're a lot more calm.
One thing that I mean, I think it's kind of a myth, but one thing I hear a lot of times that is if you move the snake to feed, it's going to regurgitate. So how does that fit into using a separate feeding bin? Is it going to make the bull snake throw up its meal when you put it back in its enclosure?
I think if you're handling it a lot, and there's a lot of squeeze, if you've got tight grip, but if you're like, if there was a snake in here and it just ate, you washed it, just finished, you can just, and just pour them in like gently. A little bit of handling's not going to hurt them. A lot is rough on them. That's why I recommend not handling your snake for about 3 to 4 days after feeding. And then when it's got the empty stomach or broke down the mouse at least, or rodent, then you can handle it. It's a little better idea. So, if you're feeding once a week, you can handle them like those 3 off days, and then there's 4 days where they got a meal in them, and it's probably, and you can still handle them, just not excessively.
Yeah.
And especially the first 2 days is more critical, I would say.
I feel like it's important to know what your animal is doing and kind of try and examine their body language, because it's when they regurge, it's not because you touch them, it's because there's this extreme sort of stress reaction. They feel vulnerable and they don't want to be weighed down by having a meal in their belly, so they puke it up. So if you have a really scared defensive snake, I would say don't mess with it when it's full. But if you have a really calm, really chill snake, just put it right back in its enclosure and let it digest. I mean, you're not going to worry. Is that about the same for Pituophis too?
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So I'll move on to a different question, because we've answered a lot here. I'm really worried I'm going to kill a baby snake. So when will I know it's going to be safe with me? What should I look for? How old should it be when I buy it? Like, how do I know I'm not killing my snake?
I know there's, like, for gophers and bull Pituophis, there's not a ton of information out there. Like, you can still read a corn snake book. It's very similar care to a pit. The biggest thing is, I think, is not killing your snake is, well, first of all, buy from a quality place. Get some good information. Ask if this snake is feeding. Ask if it has regurged ever. Ask the simple questions, and then just be diligent on your care. Like, don't like people do think they get hot. They like it hot. They do not like it hot. Hot weather, cold weather, both of those extremes will make them regurge, and which is never good. So just do a little research. And like I said, pits are very similar to corns and king snakes. And if you can't find literature on Pituophis, then you can maybe lean on a milk snake, king snake book, or a corn snake book a little bit for care. They're very similar, and that information is more readily available.
That's interesting. So that makes a lot of sense. So because you're right. I don't think I've seen too much literature on the Pituophis snakes, but there's plenty on corns and kings, and they share the same environment, very similar niches. Some might be a little bit more, if you're talking about rat snakes and corn snakes, they're a little bit more likely to be up in a tree. But otherwise, yeah, there's temperature and husbandry seems like it's going to be kind of the same environment. That makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about that.
Back east, you get more humidity and moisture. Even still, a corn snake they still love a moisture hide box. They just, it's a perfect place to hide. Like, and they feel, you'll notice it. I wish I could do it for all my snakes. I don't do it for all. I do it for my milk snakes a lot, but in some damper weather animals, but it does, you know, they still like that moisture. Sorry, that was kind of a side tangent, but
I find that it's interesting. I think giving them the option to choose between moisture and not is so valuable, because I mean, we're talking about a snake that's from areas in Southern California that are very, very dry, all the way to the East Coast, and there's bull snakes in Minnesota, and just a wide range of climates. So it seems to make sense that if you kind of set them all up, that some variations are going to spend more time in different areas of the enclosure. Do you find that's the case, or the variety and the gradients are good to have for that reason?
Yeah.
What about, that's something I wondered too, for the different localities and regions that they're found, do they interbreed easily? Like, would breeding a bull snake from some of the more southern states to a northern state, do they pair up easily, or do people tend to keep the regions intact?
I like, I love, obviously love color morphs, but I do love, that might be a misconception about me, I love natural occurring animals too. They do breed, like you can breed a Texas bull to the Kankakee bull, and from Indiana, they it's not a problem. It's all instinctual.
Gotcha.
There is like, I know in California, like that Riverside area, you get Sonorans, Great Basin, Gophers, and San Diego's all kind of converge in one spot. You do see some natural intergrades. I don't recommend man making a natural intergrade, but like, I think natural intergrade's pretty cool. Like, they do that. They tend to do that in certain areas. West Texas, and I think West Texas Sonorans and bulls kind of, I'm sure there's an intergrade zone there too.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense as successful and ecologically diverse as the snake is. I'd have to imagine that there's some crossover there. Martin Usher says you can't beat a Mexican pine snake for natural beauty. I'm not sure what that is. What's a Mexican pine snake?
There's a couple species. There's a Depii, which I like better, their personalities, but the Depii jani are really pretty. I can get one out for you right here. It's right here, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm gonna look at her for a minute. And this is a 3-year-old animal, and they just get prettier and prettier.
Oh, wow. And so is that just what they look like in the wild?
Yeah, this is a natural occurring color.
It's really cool how it's sort of faded at the front.
This is really maroon in here too. It's hard to kind of see, but got some nice maroons and oranges in here.
Mm-hmm. Ah, you're right, Martin. That's a good looking snake. Yeah, that's cool.
It's funny, I just happen to have one.
I mean, you don't just happen to have one, Jason. You've got a lot of snakes.
I just happen to have one right next to me.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good question. So Gage asked, I wonder if you know this one. What does the red head help them blend in with? What do you think about the camouflage of that?
Wow, like I would love to find a Depii or a Depii or either species in the wild. I do think with Mexico, I have not found one. I'm not sure why. I don't know why they have those colors. Like, I don't think biologists, herpetologists have done enough to really know all there is to know about these Mexican subspecies. There's a lot of unknown in these foreign countries. That, you know, it's not like the United States where we can send a, you know, I guess there probably is. There is, but they do have biologists down there. I know Herb MX does a lot. They're really awesome.
And I know it can be difficult with the coloration too to determine exactly the purpose of it, because it can be a number of different things, whether it's for sort of interpretation by other snakes, like a communication. It can be blending in with a certain clay or a certain rock. It can be for thermoregulation. It could just be a different step in the mutation. So I think there's a lot of reasons besides just camouflage, right?
Yeah. I don't know, like, per se, with the Depii jani, but, like, I do know with Red Bulls, with some Great Basin gophers I've done work with, that they do match the sand. Like, I've got some localities where the sand's orange, so the snakes tend to be orange. There's a natural variance of coloration, but they do develop, and I don't know if develop's the right word, but maybe evolve into that environment.
Awesome. Martin also says, does Jason keep the Mexican lined pine snake? He says his female is as large as his largest bull.
I've had them. I don't have any right now, but I have Gibsoni, and I can show you one of those. And those, there's not very many people that have these. I think there's only like maybe 5 or 6 people that have them, and they're the relative to the Lineatricolus. This is the Lineatricolus Gibsoni, and I'll grab one.
Yeah. One of the things when we were talking about camouflage that I really noticed was when it was moving, it had there was a lot of deception sort of in its pattern as it broke up, and I think that's when they really shine is when they're moving.
This is the Depii, the Lineatricolus Gibsoni, and they're very similar to the Lineatricolus. I think they get very similar in size, but what I have, my personal experience is these are much more docile than the Lineatricolus. The male I kept was a firecracker, and I, individual by individual basis, but
sure.
Let's give a close up look on that girl.
Yeah, that's a good example. And really docile snake. That's cool to see too. I think that's the calmest one you've had out yet. So let me ask you this. When is it a good idea to move my snake? So there's a snake, looks like he's not much bigger than a hatchling. When's a good idea to move a snake into an adult enclosure? And should you have setups in between its baby and adult enclosure, or when it's good to go, is it good to go?
I'm always in the process of upgrading their cage sizes. I have some bull snakes just right over here that they're about 4 foot. They're going to go into the 70 quart tubs next. And they'll go a good year in those. Depending how big they get, they may go into a bigger tub after.
Okay, so you do kind of step them up as they grow.
Yeah, I just kind of look at them. I don't weigh my snakes. I don't like, it's not like an exact science. I just look at it and then like, this is ready, it's a judgment call.
At a certain point, it looks too small inside of it, or its enclosure looks too small for how big the snake has gotten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, it's not necessarily always a bad thing that a snake's in a small cage. Like, because I know, like, with kings and milk snakes, they kind of like tight, small, cramped areas. They kind of thrive in those areas. That's where they feel comfortable. The pit needs to spread out a little bit more, I believe, but as long as they're not restricted from moving around, I think that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, excellent. So now let me ask you this. So let's say I bought a pair because I want to breed them. So I bought an unrelated male and a female captive bred. And I want to breed them and make my money back with snake keeping here. What do I need to know about breeding my snakes?
Well, there's probably more information out there than when I had. There wasn't hardly anything. And I read Ron Markell's King and Milk Snake book. That's how I learned how to breed snakes and cycle snakes. Since then, I have very much developed my own little ways of doing things. I've tweaked stuff a lot. I'm a little bit more unconventional than most people, but I've been successful. So whatever works for you. Cooling is going to be your most important key. Age, of course, but cooling. If you do not cool a snake, and yes, I know people with bred corn snakes without cycling them, they get a little, they sense it, they can tell it got 5 degrees cooler. But if you want good fertility rate, you're really going to want to get a good hibernation in at least 3 months. I would recommend 50 to 65 degrees. Cooler is better. Why hibernation? Males' sperm count dies out throughout the summer. The sperm count will die off and infertility gets greater. When you cycle them, it resets that fertility rate, and so they produce viable sperm. Same with the female, it makes them go into ovulation and produce eggs. If you do not do the hibernation, yes, you can possibly get eggs, but your chances of fertility rate are far less.
I was just listening to, for those of you who don't know, there's a podcast called Colubrid and Colubroid Radio with Dr. Loafman and Matt Most. And they just had an episode on brumation that was really good that I think folks should listen to. It talks a lot about the science of it too, which is really interesting. But let me ask you this, and it'll kind of be like a two-parter question. We're coming to the end too, so guys, if you have questions, type them in, and we'll ask Jason before we close out. But let me ask you, it's a two-parter. Tell me something that you've learned, or what's something you wish you had known before you brought your first snake home, and tell me something you've learned about Pituophis recently.
What was the second part? Sorry.
Tell me something you've learned about Pituophis recently. And the first was, what do you wish you knew before you brought your first snake home, however long ago that was?
I remember when I first started out, and you're excited, and you get excited, and you get, people tend to get scared if the snake doesn't eat every week. And like, I remember sitting there, I bought a gray band and a hunter and an Arizona Mountain King. They bought these 3, not easy to keep, not the supers. Gray bands are tough. They can be tough. They can be way tough. But they will go without feeding a lot of times. Like Mountain King snakes, they go off feed. That's the thing I learned. Probably the one thing I learned quickly was to not stress out if they don't eat every time. As long as that body weight's looking good. Obviously, if you're going months, you're going to start getting a little worried. But a week or here and there, not a big deal. People tend to stress for that.
Yeah, that's good advice, I think, for a lot of new keepers is relax. Don't overstress out for the non-eating if it's just a week or two. It's not like it's a king cobra or something. What's is there something you've learned recently about Pituophis? Like you said, you developed a lot of your own strategies.
I'm always learning stuff with this hobby, and there's always little things. If you're gonna breed, like, one thing, keep 2 pairs. It's always a great idea. Something happens when you lose one here and there. But what I've learned about pits is, like, they're a lot stronger than other colubrids. Like, and I say this in stuff that I've done. Like, I've had I basically am you keep a large collection. I basically an uncertified vet. I know how to treat my animals if they get sick for this or that, and I learned that pits that like they can take a higher dose of meds like Flagyl or something, and it doesn't. They're just a lot stronger. Like, and I mean I guess I've learned that, but I've kind of always known that. So.
It's a hardy snake, so it's a good beginner snake, right? It's harder to kill.
Oh yeah, they're just as good as they're basically a corn snake on steroids. Like they're just bigger and stronger, and they eat every time, and they're wonderful animals, and they're vocal, and they got a big personality. That's what I love about them.
Nice. Someone asked, for snakes hatched in the fall, do you go straight into brumation in the winter, or is it okay to wait a year or two to start a brumation cycle?
This room is all subadults and hatchlings, and so I've got a lot in here that are not.
Your camera just shut off. So 1 second. There you go.
There it goes. Yeah, there's a lot of snakes in here, and they're all these ones from here are all 2022s or 21s, and yeah, they're gonna stay up throughout the summer.
So you keep them up year round until they're breeding age.
Yeah, if they become a problem feeder, I will sometimes then hibernate them. Sorry about the camera work. I screwed up everything.
Hey, it works though. It's nice that we can see the whole room.
Yeah. I usually don't hibernate young animals. You can, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's probably good for them. I don't. But it probably is because it's, North American animals. We have winters. Baby snakes hibernate in the wild, so I would imagine it would be good for a captive born too. But I don't. I tend to don't do it unless they're a picky feeder and I can't get them to feed for nothing, and then I might cool them.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense for a picky feeder. For those that don't know much about the way that works, it's when it's cold, they're not going to be eating, so you're not going to be feeding them because they need the outside heat to digest. So it's
and the brumation is to slow the metabolism down so they stay alive longer.
Yeah, I always think of it as like hitting pause, and they undergo. It's a little bit like a sleep too, because they do still undergo some processes, especially the breeders. But otherwise, it's just they need that break. Sounds nice, honestly. I wish I could do that for winter.
Yeah, me too.
Someone asked if you have a favorite subspecies and or morph.
My favorite species is Sonoran Gophers. It was my first pits I got. I just love their disposition. They're and they're all different, but I just like a Sonoran Gopher. I'll grab one out that I think is really pretty right here. Might as well, right?
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. No one wants to see me. They want to see the snakes.
One here. I guess this was a good spot to set up. But this is a 2.5-year-old animal. So I didn't cool it this year. It's borderline. It's probably good to have another year. This guy is a little bit of a firecracker, but look at these colors. I mean, this is a normal snake. This is not a morph. And you get these chocolates and yellows, and yeah, I just think they're beautiful.
And the Sonoran Gopher, that's down kind of in the American Southwest, right?
Yeah, Southern Cal to all the way over to New Mexico, actually into Texas too. The West Texas has Sonorans too, and they range up I think they go up to about the Grand Canyon, is about as far north as they go, and then they go, all the way down into Mexico, pretty far actually.
Okay. I didn't know how far down they went into Mexico. That makes
sense.
It's
actually a huge range. It's really huge.
Yeah. Kelly asked, she said, not sure if you answered this earlier, but what size or age do you like your females to be before you breed them?
Like I don't weigh stuff. I was asked that today earlier. Someone asked what was weight. I don't weigh them. Like I just visually do it. But it's always, to me, it's 3 to 4 years. And sometimes 5 if you get one that just doesn't grow fast. But usually 3 to 4 just depends how good a feeder they are, I guess.
So you're basically looking, and when you look at it and you say that's a full-grown adult, that's when you're ready?
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of snakes in here, but I know each snake pretty decent in here. Yeah. And so like, I know when I don't know when they're ready. It's really not, I don't know. People tend to overthink that a little bit, but.
Yeah. Tom, sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Tom asked earlier, he said, what is the difference in the clumpers, dyers, and Applegate albinos in the San Diego Gophers? Is it just different lines?
So there's four really distinguished lineages of albinism in San Diego's. You got Applegates, which is the popular one, which is a T negative. And this is a big stuff. This is always a confusing thing on the forums and stuff. So you got Applegates as T negative. The Bechdel albino is an old strain too. That was originally added into the snows. And that, I think Bechdel's a biologist. They're not as vibrant as, but they're not as vibrant as the Applegates, but they're both T negatives. Then you got Dyer. Dyer, in my experience, Dyer strain, Clumper strain, and Super Hypo, they're all compatible. They're all, to me, this is my opinion. I've had people get mad at me for saying this. They're the same thing. There's just different degrees of colors. And then there's another strain of T positive albino and the McGurty albino. Brian McGurty found one in the wild and brought that strain to the hobby. Jack Dyer brought the Dyers. From what I understand, the Bechdel albino and the Dyers really kind of they can intermingle, and you can get both variations out of the same. The Clumpers, or the Clumpers, Dyers, and Super Hypos, yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. They kind of been intertwined. Maybe it's because they've been line bred for so long that way. And then I've heard that the original McGurty albino was bred to an Applegate albino and got 50-50. So there is some compatibility issues, but they are different strains. I know of 4, there might be more. There's more animals found every year. So
yeah.
That's the biggest thing. Two T negatives and 2 T positives, and they're a little different from each other. They're kind of subtle, especially with the McGurtys and the Dyers. They can be hard to distinguish.
But they work together. It sounds like that
those two don't. The McGurtys and the so the 2 T positives do not work together.
Okay.
And the T negatives do not work together. But the Bechdel albino T negative is compatible with the Dyer, and the McGurty's Dyer with compatible with the Applegate. So it's a mess, man.
That's interesting. Yeah. I had someone describe it, and the way they said it was that basically albinism is and I don't even know what snake they were talking about with this, but it's not just one gene that goes there. There's a number of different genes along the melanin pathway, and maybe one strain cuts off this one and the snake gets albino, but maybe another gene cuts off that link in the pathway and whatever, short thing, kind of like the old Christmas light chains where one light bulb is out and the whole thing turns off because one light bulb is missing. And it doesn't matter which one it is, but that's how you get the different strands. That's how I picture it in my head anyway. Is that way off base, or does that seem to make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty good analogy, really. I like, and yeah, it's kind of a little, I'm not a biologist, like I'm a hobbyist, but yeah, it's pretty complex. I find it very interesting. My power just went out.
You got ghosts.
Yeah, someone's playing around. Yeah, I've heard that, like, corn snakes and cow kings, the first two albino colubrids actually were compatible because the albinism gene was on the same allele. Like, that's a little, it's even a lot for me to understand. But yeah, it's just interesting how some line up and some don't. And I've seen a couple color morphs and colubrids where they don't mesh. They just won't. They just won't go together. So it's just genetics. It's fun, but it's more than I truly understand.
It kind of makes you feel a little bit like a mad scientist over the years, trying to mix and match stuff and getting unexpected results, both positively and negatively.
Yep, I've had both.
Well, is there that's it for the questions I've gotten in the audience. Is there anything you wanted to add on to, Jason, or any animals you wanted to show before we headed out?
If I can show some, or we're good. Like, I think we covered it pretty good though.
Yeah, let's close. What's the favorite snake you're growing up right now that you have easy access to?
Actually, it's right here too. I love this snake, and it's just the snake this is a striped T negative albino San Diego, and she's kind of softened up, but she was getting some green. She's getting some green stripes in there, but
wow.
I've only hashed a few of these, like probably 4 or 5 of these in my time, but for whatever reason, I don't know. It's a simple. And some of the other favorites are in hibernation, so this one's easy.
Martin asked if you have any black pines you could show.
Yeah. Just a hatchling, but
see, it's like I asked. Jason's got it all.
That's just a 2021.
Well, it's hard to believe we're already in 22.
Yeah. Some of them, well, this one's in the blue, but it has more color pattern in it, even though it's in the blue. But
and do they get more pattern as they age, or does that
it blackens out?
It blackens out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you everyone for joining in and participating with questions. I think that helped get sort of a lot of good info out there too. And Jason, thank you so much for being a part of this. Really appreciate you and your friend there helping with the camera. It's I hope this can be a really good resource for folks that are getting into these snakes, either as a first snake or an entry into this species after working with something else. So again, thank you so much. I'm really grateful for you coming on. It's been a little bit more than a year since we did the last panel. So who knows, maybe we'll see you in 2023.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks again. You can check this out on YouTube later at the Hurt Panel forums. Dustin, I saw you on their Scale Box. Has been one of our guests as well. So it's good to see old friends showing up in the chat. Everyone have a great night. And it's Monday Night Football. So go Rams. All right. See you guys later.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.